Hello and welcome to today's conversation. I'm Peter Copeland, Deputy Director of Domestic Policy here at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and today we're tackling a missing piece in Canada's housing debate: productivity in residential construction. We have added workers and poured in public and private dollars, yet output per worker has stalled. Backlogs have grown and affordability remains out of reach for many Canadians. Our guests, Professor Murtaza Haider and housing analyst Stephen Moranis, have a new Macdonald-Laurier Institute study that tries to separate the signal from the noise on this issue, showing how different metrics, productivity metrics that is, tell very different stories, why measurement matters, and what it would take to actually build a faster, smarter, and cheaper. So we're going to dig into regulation, firm structure, tech adoption, labor and capital supply, and what a realistic federal, provincial, municipal policy levers look like. Before we do, I want to introduce and welcome our guests. So first up, we have Murtaza Haider, who is professor at the Alberta School of Business, as well as the executive director of the Cities Institute at the University of Alberta. Previously, he served as the associate dean of graduate programs and a professor of data science and real estate management at Toronto Metropolitan University. And his research focuses on business analytics, housing markets, transportation, infrastructure, and human development in Canada and South Asia. Thanks for being here, Murtaza.
Thank you for having me.
Very good. And a partner in crime, I think it's fair to say, Stephen Moranis, who is a seasoned executive with more than 2 decades of experience leading large-scale groundbreaking projects from conception to implementation. He's founded and managed several successful ventures, including Realty Sellers and Peerage Realty Partners, and he's held prominent leadership roles in organizations such as Toronto Regional Real Estate Board and the Canadian Real Estate Association. In addition to his executive work, Stephen is the co-author, along with Murtaza, of the Haider Moranis Bulletin, the country's most widely read real estate column featured in the Financial Post and syndicated across over 140 media outlets nationwide. Wow, it's very impressive. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So before we dive into the paper, why don't you share a bit about your work? And what you do to understand the housing challenges we face in this country.
I'll go first. Essentially, as an academic, I've been involved in studying the supply side of housing in Canada for almost 30 years now. Very early in my career as a student, as a graduate student working on a doctorate, I realized that the overwhelming focus, and let's say 95% of the effort in research, is on demand side, like professors, universities. They're all focused on the demand side of it. Very few people actually go out and say, what is happening on the supply side? And this ignorance about understanding of housing supply is one of the root causes of why we are in a housing affordability crisis. It's a supply side problem where demand exceeds far more than what we have built, and this has been acutely aware. I've been acutely aware of this for at least 3 decades, thanks to the work done by some of my good friends, Mike Buzzelli at the University of Western Ontario or Western University, and others. And I think beyond him and I can't even come up with a third name of someone who actually has focused on housing supply in Canada, and that is how rare it is. And I think we're going to unpack some of these challenges today.
Very good. Thank you, Murtaza. Stephen.
Well, I'm happy to say that Murtaza and I are going to be celebrating 8 years of writing the Haider Moranis column bulletin for Post Media in November, which has been a great experience for us and has opened a lot of opportunities like MLI and other places that we're doing research. We had the privilege of being witnesses at the Finance Committee on their study with respect to inflation in housing during COVID. So it's a great partnership, and I'm enjoying it. My background is mainly in the brokerage industry, the services on how people buy and sell properties. It's the Canadian Real Estate Association. There's 165,000 real estate agents out there trying to help Canadians buy and sell on a daily basis. And, you know, there's there's a lot of challenges with respect to their industry itself,
Mm.
which people have read about, and it's going through a lot of changes and makeovers with respect to the delivery of those services and choices of those services. So I basically function as a real estate strategist and a columnist, and do a lot of consulting and a lot of work, thankfully, with Murtaza.
Hmm. Well, we're very grateful you're lending your time and decades of experience to this discussion and the paper you've done for MLI, which is not yet out, but we'll tease it here a little bit. Um, First, tell us what it's focused on. I mean, it's focused on construction sector productivity. So it's really interesting, I think, that you chose to dig into this further, because everyone is aware of the housing supply and affordability challenges now. There are many aspects of the policy mix, so to speak, that are being analyzed, but one that may be overlooked until now is construction productivity, in particular in the residential sector. So I'll turn it over to you to tell us why you focused on this and what the paper reveals.
Absolutely. So what happens is that Stephen and I write this weekly column for the National Post, Financial Post, and one day we saw this amazing report from CMHC, and this is recent. So the report said that housing construction productivity has gone down, and we had written about this topic multiple times before, especially because McKinsey Global Institute had a big study done on the similar topic in a global scale. So we were aware of the topic, but caught our attention was that, and I'll give you some numbers for comparison,
Mhm.
that the number of people involved in construction, residential construction, that number of workers is now 650,000. And it used to be something like 250,000 maybe in the 70s. So now it has gone up by so much, 650,000. And if you look at the number of homes being produced, that's still around 250, 260,000 homes. So you see that there has been a significant, massive, I would say, increase in the number of workers employed in residential construction sector, but the housing output is almost the same, if not less. So that was the focus of the study done by CMHC, and they also estimated that if the productivity had increased in terms of number of units per worker, there would have been far more homes being built in Canada. So
Mhm.
that we wrote that column based on the study, and then all of a sudden we got these emails from our friends in the construction industry saying, "You're measuring the wrong thing. A house in the 70s is not the same as the house in today. Homes are much bigger, and they're more expensive for a variety of reasons because they're not the same bare-bone homes with 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms with the cookie-cutter homes of the 70s or 60s, or even the 50s when people return, when the soldiers return from the war and they build these cookie cutter homes. You could see in almost every municipality in Canada, homes are much bigger now and they're more complex and they're more expensive. The materials are more expensive. It's not the same refrigerator. So anyhow, we got the point and we said, okay, let us now focus on something more deep. And then we did the study and we realized that housing productivity is a very complex topic, or construction productivity is a very complex topic. It's more complex than measuring productivity in manufacturing, because homes are unique and no two homes are alike. So therefore, coming up with the same metrics of productivity that you use for manufacturing, where products are indistinguishable in quality because they're identical, made from machines, we can't use the same approach. And then we looked at multiple metrics and realized that if the productivity could be low based on number of units produced per worker, or it could be high based on value added from residential construction per worker or per hours worked. Which means that if you pick a different metric, that is value add from residential construction, you get a positive increase in productivity versus the other. But the story doesn't end here. The story doesn't end here because that's nominal value add. You could have the value add increasing over time because of inflation. So you have to control, and you have to get sort of the real productivity metrics where you have control for inflation. So when you control for inflation, then you get a slightly moderated picture of the value add, but still it's rising. It's not declining, and it's rising differently in different provinces. all the way up to 2020, and then there's a dip there. But then again, if you look at the industry before COVID-19, considering that as a stable time period, you realize that the productivity based on value added is not necessarily declining, even if you were to control for inflation and you look at the real value added rather than nominal. But the story still doesn't end here, because how do you control for inflation? I mean, I know, and I'm not going to name names, but some of our colleagues who are also active in housing industry in analysis, they have been using the same inflation measures to sort of come and go, the same for groceries, like say, value add, and you say, okay, this is nominal, so inflation is 2-3% or 5%. Well, that's the grocery inflation, right? You have to find the right kind of metrics to deflate. Is it a GDP deflator or whatnot? So depending upon the kind of deflator you use, the productivity measures change as well.
Mhm.
So that is the focus of this paper. The paper actually addresses the nuances in measuring productivity in residential construction and highlights the fact that you can't do this in a hurry, that you can't pick one arbitrary metric and run with it, because the conclusions you will draw about productivity in residential construction will be entirely dependent upon the metric you have used and the choices you have made. And the deflators or the inflation indicators you have not used or used, or the value add measures you have used or not used, will all lead to a particular conclusion that would be biased by the choices you've made. So we are not saying that we are unbiased, but we are saying we have discovered that the choices you make in defining the productivity in residential construction would have a big impact on how you come up with and conclude what you end up concluding.
That's very good. I want to drill down into that, but I think that gives a good overview of the main findings. Stephen, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's a pretty good summary of the paper, and we can probably just carry on with the nuances that it brings out.
Yes, because that is really the story, I suppose. So just to back up a bit, what do you mean when you're talking about construction productivity? Is it the start of like the application process, or is it shovel in the ground? How do you measure this?
Okay, now we're getting into the weeds. Okay, so what we have used is completions, housing completions, right? That the house was started construction, and now the completion is done, and then somebody's going to absorb, some household will move into it, and we're looking at the housing completions per worker, and then we see that is declining, but it's declining because the homes are much larger now, and then actually there are two things that have happened. Even if you look at completions, low-rise homes such as single-family detached homes, they have increased over time. They have increased in size over time. And I think we wrote a column about 5 years or so ago explaining that the average home size has increased for low-rise housing, but the average size of the apartments or condominiums have shrunk. So these micro condos of 300 square feet or 400 square feet, and the average size now resting between 500 to 700 square feet. It used to be much larger apartments, much larger condominiums in the past. So we had two trends happening at the same time, that the apartment sizes were shrinking and the low-rise homes were growing. So anyhow, what we are looking at completions. It doesn't matter the size. And when you look at completions, then you see fewer completions over time because the labor force is increasing. And at this webinar will leave many people wondering if they were peeling an onion in this hour, because every layer that you touch, there's much more to it. Because we didn't used to build that many condominiums. I mean, the share of construction of condominiums, these are multifamily housing, may that be apartments or condominiums, that has also increased over time. And the completion time it takes and the number of workers required, despite being all the advances into construction technology, that has not resulted in an improvement in the number of completions per workers. So you could see that in towns like Toronto and Vancouver, where condominiums or apartments are a higher proportion, you get a different productivity metric than places where condominiums are not the majority. And I think in Toronto, at some point, the housing supply in the city of Toronto, not the Greater Toronto area, but in the city of Toronto, almost 80+% of the new housing was just condominiums. So you could see that the productivity measures are totally driven by one type of housing and nothing else. And then when you talk about construction workers, right? we automatically assume, yeah, here's the peeling of an onion. We always assume that these workers are employed in construction of new homes. It turns out that maybe half, even more than half of the workers are employed in renovations, right? So when you say how many workers in residential construction, you still have to differentiate between workers employed in building new homes and workers who are just building you a new basement or demo of your new washrooms and whatnot. Because I think at this stage, and I'm going by memory, a larger proportion of the workers in residential construction sector are involved in renovations rather than construction. So again, when you bundle them together, let's say that 650,000 workers are in residential construction. We at this stage don't know how many of those are in reno and how many of those are in actual new construction. It's peeling an onion. It gets fun. It gets interesting with peeling off of every layer because we see many more new things there.
Yeah. Oh, my eyes are watering already as you peel off the layers here. But just maybe to summarize kind of the two main productivity takeaways that you can then build on when it comes to completions per hour worked and worker, the trend here is a kind of decline or stagnation. But then when you look at this real value added per hour of worked, which measures kind of like the total economic value of what's being produced, you see an increase. Now you see an increase in that figure. But that figure is net of costs. So it's the net economic value, real controlled for inflation is increasing. But my question for you is, what does that really say? Because we also see costs going up, and many of the costs associated with housing have to do with things like development charges or the applications, getting around permitting and zoning and all of that. So how do you interpret this outcome here that we are in fact getting increase in value per hours worked, but that value might be net of on top of a big rise in cost that you might not think of as necessary, right? And you might be able to strip some of those away.
A lot of the costs are also soft costs, which are a big contributor to analyzing the productivity. So let's say interest and financial charges. I mean, sales and marketing costs, it could be 20-30% of the overall project costs, and yet that doesn't add anything to the productivity. And
right.
And you talk about slicing the onion open. There's also the workforces, depending on the sector, are quite different. I mean, if you're talking pre-construction condo, you've got large construction company developers who are running with hundreds and thousands of workers on their books who are completing projects. A lot of the residential work is made up of a complexity of a lot of sub-trades, right? Especially the infill or renovation sector. You get a general contractor and they basically sub the work to plumbers, electricians, carpenters, masoners, et cetera, et cetera. So this is part of the dilemma in having sort of a common ground for all sectors of construction.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have a good point, Peter. I think the net value add controls for the value net of costs. So even if it shows that even in real value added, you see per worker, it's increasing but stable, it's net of costs. But what your question has very big implications in terms of delivery. And if you allow me,
yeah.
From the societies and government's point of view, from the federal government, CMHC, housing infrastructure, cities and communities, from their point of view, they're not looking to value add. They're looking at number of units, right? That's the metric that they have committed to. They didn't say that we're going to have this $1 trillion of value added to the housing sector. That's immaterial. That's irrelevant. What is relevant to the feds and the provinces is how many new homes are constructed, right? And that's where your question becomes very critical, because your question is, what about these other soft costs, which Stephen alluded to? So if it takes you 3 years or more to get a housing construction project approved in a city like Toronto, where you applied to get a high-rise built, and it took more than 3 years for all the approvals to go through, then that's a cost being added to the consumer. That's not value add. That's a cost to the society. So what the need for, and when we get to the solution in the end, is to get rid of as many soft costs as we can through innovation, through artificial intelligence, through because no one is better off if it takes municipalities 3 years or months to decide upon a permit application. And I give you an example. As I now recently started discovering Edmonton, I met with the city officials there, and they were very proud. They said, we have a single day application process, that if you bring a correct, everything is sound about your application, you apply in the morning, you get a permit by the end of the day, right? So that's the kind of efficiencies that can be achieved to expedite construction and get more units built. And it is for this reason that Edmonton, being less than half the size of the city of Toronto, built more owner-oriented homes in 2024 than the city of Toronto. And that's where you see the difference, is that when you expedite and when you streamline the development processes and approval processes, and you check and you create incentives for the municipal bureaucracy to be productive, you see them responding. And then the gains you make in getting approvals faster, approvals or denials. But I'm not saying that every application should be approved. I'm saying make decisions faster. Whatever you have to decide, don't take 3 years or 1,000 days. Just decide sooner than later. And because that would be a cost to the society. And at the end of the day, we are not going to be measuring our success in housing Canadians by value add metrics. We'll be looking at how many new homes we built for Canadians to find shelter in.
Yeah, and that's where I think it's really interesting. I mean, hanging your hat on metrics to tell stories. I mean, that's one of the things you've noted in your initial remarks, is you need to be careful about that. And we tend to assume that productivity metrics mean, you're just getting more for what you put in, and that's a net benefit. But I think the value added metric itself shows in a way how that's that can't tell the story in this case, because if the net value of the good, which may be driven by some let's call them non-negative things, such as people desiring more complex and unique homes, but more costs in terms of the length and the regulatory compliance and what have you, then I mean, ultimately that's not a good thing, because people are struggling with housing affordability and getting the supply, which is what the metrics I think show with respect to completions per hour worked and per worker. So it's really good and important to separate things out, if you will.
So I think, Peter, the point was that we were trying to find that middle ground, which would allow the industry, the construction industry, and the government to come and see each other's perspective. The government says 650,000 workers building 250,000 homes, the productivity has gone down. It's a fact. But then the industry says, well, we are building bigger homes and more expensive homes and more complex homes, and construction is difficult and all that. So because if you think about it, we have added layers of complexity in construction regulations over time, and the number of inspections, the kind of inspections, so everything. There are a lot of people who are actually involved in construction that actually are not doing construction, but they're in the process of compliance, so that they are in compliance of the construction and other regulations that the municipal governments have and other governments have. And that's perfectly fine. We're not saying this should be a Wild West for construction, but at the same time, all of this delays the construction, slows down the construction, involves more people, and therefore the focus should remain, as I mentioned earlier, on the number of units we produce. Peter, we did a study, Stephen and I did a study a few years ago for Macdonald-Laurier Institute, And I think one of the graphs in that study, in that paper, should be sent to every municipal councillor across Canada and every mayor, that they should see it with their own eyes. That in the 70s, we were building 12,000 homes per million Canadians. In the 70s, we were building 12,000 homes per million Canadians. That number went down to about 5,000 homes per million Canadians in the mid 90s, and has improved slightly, but not necessarily in the way. So if you thought that housing was unaffordable or getting unaffordable in the 70s with all that new supply, imagine the kind of challenges society and economy would face when you have a significant increase in the population. So you have a huge increase in demand, and your productivity has, and your supply rate has gone down in terms of fewer homes for more people. And that's the way we ended up. This is a self-inflicted wound in Canada. Housing affordabilities, we have inflicted ourselves with this pain, because we could have built homes necessary to house the Canadian population, but we added layers of bureaucracy, we added layers of complexity in approval processes, we added layers of construction complexities in how construction is done. We made it so complex that now, despite spending billions or trillions, the governments are giving it so many incentives, we're still stuck at 260, 270,000 starts per year. And that is not today. That's happening for the last 4 decades. We're stuck in that rut, and something has to be done about it.
Well, and the government is now proposing what they want to build. How many 100,000 homes a year? Is it 500,000 or?
Yes, so the government wants to build 3.5 million more homes on top of 2.5 million homes in the next 10 years. That equates to about 400,000 homes per year. So imagine our growth, our supply rate is 250,000 homes. To restore affordability to something like 2001 or 2019, we have to bring it to 400,000 homes per year, and we're not making a dent in that productivity. And I think
we're not even close to that. And the real solution has to be, how do we achieve that? How do we, forget about studying the history of the productivity and what we've experienced. What needs to be done at all levels, public, private, governmental, to produce 450,000 homes a year?
Yes, and Peter, in the last 10 years under the previous Liberal government, we saw voices gaining traction, voices that started saying, oh, we have enough homes. In fact, we don't need to build homes. You can still find op-eds published in Canadian newspapers as recently as last month saying, oh, we have millions of vacant homes, and we don't need to, the supply is already here. We just have to figure out a way and we don't have millions of vacant homes. This is a poor read of Canadian statistics by OECD. OECD couldn't read Canadian census data properly and wrote an erroneous report that gets repeated again and again and again. But those wrong or well-meaning, ill-informed voices gained a lot of traction with the last Liberal government. And then you could see people coming up with ridiculous ideas saying we don't even have a housing supply crisis, even though you have a unanimous consensus across all the big banks. If you look at the commentary coming from the economists at TD and Desjardins and RBC and others in academic, everyone all economists agree that this is a problem where supply has not caught up or stayed in step with demand. And you can still see people questioning this, getting credence with the governments. And I hope that this Liberal government is able to shake off those well-meaning, uninformed views that are detrimental to our goal of housing Canadians, providing them with affordable shelter.
I would certainly agree. Before we shift to the policy landscape, there have been a lot of changes proposed and announced recently. Can you say a bit more about what your paper or the data landscape in Canada says about separating? You alluded to the changes in, let's call it intrinsic construction design changes. So people are demanding more amenities, more complex homes. So that's part of the reason why construction productivity per worker is lower. Then the other element of it are the extrinsic features, so timelines and processes and regulatory compliance and what have you. Can you speak to how your paper or the data out there allows for that to be separated out, or perhaps the story is more that it doesn't?
Stephen, you want to say something?
Why don't you take that? That's
So, look, the question is, what is government doing right now? What are their policies, and how this paper inform their decision making? Let's look at the government's big steps. They have come up with this new agency called Build Canada Homes, right? So let's debate or discuss this for a few minutes and see how we can apply the knowledge we have gained in this paper to them. Build Canada Homes is a Government of Canada initiative, initially spending $4 billion and then expanding it more later. And a former councillor from the City of Toronto is now the head of that agency. And their mandate is not really clear. And actually, Peter, you and I had taken the time to figure out if there's a white paper, have they written any 20 pages of what they want to do? It turns out that they just produce websites. So that's the thing that concerns me a great deal, of not taking policy making seriously by the government, that they announce agencies and initiatives, and then when you look for documents, it turns out that all you have is a fancy website, and you can't even look for a white paper that have all the specs in it. So we are less informed about it, but then I'm going to take a few guesses. They want to increase the supply of affordable homes, but then the question is, what is affordable? Is it affordable to purchase, or is it affordable to rent? And is the Build Canada Homes going to be an agency investing Canadian taxpayers' money to leverage more investments, or is it going to get into the construction business itself? I'll be alarmed if the government gets into the construction business itself. That's not the job of any government. Governments are there to govern, to maintain a level playing field, to maintain competition, prevent oligopolies, prevent people from taking advantages, and protect the consumers. And they can do so with Build Canada Homes by doing all of this. But the thing that concerns me is that this is going to be a new bureaucracy. Right now, it's under the Minister for Housing, under HICC, which is the Federal Ministry for Housing and Infrastructure. But then it's going to become something of its own, and it will be now a third entity in Canada. So you have Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation, you have HICC, and now it's going to be Build Canada Homes. And then why do we have to add layers of bureaucracies to build more homes? And we know that we haven't been able to do so in the past. Why not we rely on the expertise that is already with the HICC and CMHC? They're very smart people working for CMHC. This could have easily been done through them, but then the government decided, no, we got to brand something new. Okay, leaving that aside, what they have to do is to focus on non-market housing. Non-market housing is the housing for people who are priced out of the cheapest rental markets. And it's no longer a question of productivity, even though our report and studies on productivity, how do you increase the productivity? But then you can increase the productivity by investing public dollars, by focusing on non-market housing. And you know what, Peter, what you mentioned earlier about the complexities of design, and everybody wants a different design. Well, non-market housing could be standardized. This is housing being built for the lowest income strata in Canada. Their numbers have far exceeded the supply right now. We have roughly 5% of Canadian homes that could be considered social housing or affordable housing, and these are rental affordable housing. 5%. In Western Europe, it's between 15 to 20% of the housing being social housing. So we are far behind. Even if we double the housing, social housing in Canada, we are nowhere near similar economies where there's a welfare economy, where there's a just society, or trying to be able to cater to the needs of all. So what the government can do is use the Build Canada Homes and builds not non-market housing. And this housing could be standardized because it's non-market. You don't have to go and place a different kind of a countertop in every other unit. You can standardize it. You can come up with already exists a catalog of approved homes that the municipalities can use to expedite their approvals. You can leverage public land, and then because you're using similar design, similar non-customized homes, your productivity will increase because the labor working on one project can be moved to another project, taking all that experience. So every project they complete, they are far more proficient because of experience. All good things could happen if Build Canada Homes exclusively focuses on non-market housing.
Stephen, do you want to add to that?
Well, that's absolutely good point. If you look back at wartime housing in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, it was more standardized. A lot of the comments with respect that houses are bigger and more complex is also driven by the upgrade mentality of charging people more for the housing. You want the quartz or marble countertops or this, that, and the other. There could be just more basic functionality, which would streamline, the construction and improve productivity. And people just, basically, it was all driven by profit, to make housing more complex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's interesting points. Certainly, efficiencies to be found in reducing the complexity as it shows up. You're suggesting on the demand side from consumers, but also probably due to business incentives as well to go that route, which ultimately creates productivity challenges. Some of the delays in particular that we're experiencing and contribute to unaffordable housing. Circling back to the Build Canada homes, I think it's interesting, Murtaza, on the website they do say in most of the announcements and public discussion of it that it's about making housing affordable or affordable housing, which depending how you take it can have a technical or non-technical term. In the technical sense, it could mean social housing, non-market housing. And to be fair, they have indicated that, and all of the announcements, as far as I can tell to date, have been focused on making Crown land available for non-market housing. But they should be a little clearer about that, because making general housing affordable, which is the bigger issue, I think it's fair to say, in Canada, or affects more people, and be careful not to sell the important focus on non-market housing, because there certainly is a part of the population that needs to be served through that, from the kind of sales pitch that it's making housing more affordable in general, which I think will take other policy approaches to.
Peter, if you think about a city, any big city like Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, Calgary, you think about people who are essential for the city. These are people who drive ambulances, the first responders, your school teachers. These are the people who build the foundations of a community, of a society. And we have reached a stage in housing, lack of housing affordability in places like Toronto and Vancouver, where school teachers, people who are driving ambulances, first responders, they're unable to get into the housing market on the purchasing side. And then there's another layer. When you go to a mall and you shop, there are people who are managing security in a mall. When you go into a parking lot, there's people who are managing the parking lots, and their income potentials are even less. So yes, so teachers are struggling to buy homes, but then what about people who are in your guarding and looking after your safety in a mall? They are unable to rent the most of cheapest rental units in a city. That's why social housing is not charity. It is an attempt to house the labor force we desperately need. The society doesn't work just because you have got AI programmers and coders and engineers and doctors. The society functions because we have everyone there, from those who serve tables to those who are monitoring or managing safety in malls. And it is incumbent upon us, for the welfare and growth of our economies, to have housing for all, not just for those who can afford it. That's why I'm very particular about having Build Canada Home focus on social housing, because I don't see it as a charity thing. I think as an investment in increasing our overall economic productivity, because then people can move to places where their labor is more required. Because right now, our labor mobility is severely constrained, because if you happen to be somewhere where you're somehow managing your housing, you can't leave, because if you leave, you'll end up in a place where you can't afford housing. And that's a serious constraint. You have to have a very mobile talent pool to gain real productivity gains.
Well, I think the problem is going to be exasperated in 2026 with all the governmental back to work policies full time. There's people who hybrid working or, working virtually totally have been able to move out of the central business cores to afford decent housing, for young families, for schooling and all the other stuff. And now with commuting and gridlock, and I think there's going to be a real sort of complex host of problems that we're all going to face with the affordability and the inconvenience of, it's not necessarily going to rehabilitate the central business districts, which have become, less popular because of virtual working.
Absolutely. I mean, I must quickly mention, I mean, I spent a great deal of time in downtown Edmonton, where my current office is located. And you can see that a lack of investment and working remotely has created a very big problem of homelessness and substance abuse and crime. The city, when the workers leave, others will move in. And it creates a sense of lack of security and whatnot, which Edmonton downtown is facing. And it was a similar situation in other places, but as people returned to work, we didn't see much of it. But I'll be remiss if I don't mention another point, Peter, which is critical for productivity, and that is this capital labor ratio, which I think our colleagues who are in the construction industry should pay attention to. And if you look at the capital per worker in terms of billions, and then chain dollars, not inflation adjusted dollars, you'll see that our ratio of capital investment relative to labor has gone down as well, which means that the construction firms have been spending more on labor and less on capital. And some of the econometric work that we did showed that the link between productivity is tied to capital intensity. If the capital intensity improves, which means that in the choice between spending on labor and capital, if firms invest more in capital, in technology, and so on and so forth, you see productivity increasing. And that is where we believe that the firms have to focus on if they really want to make a difference in increasing the supply of housing in Canada.
Very good points. With respect to Build Canada Homes, I would certainly agree that the government should be focusing on non-market housing, but maybe change the messaging to ensure there's no confusion there. Because yes, it is a very important part of the housing mix, but I think not the general affordability and supply issue, which may not be the primary responsibility of the federal government, but they and provincial governments need to do what they can, I think, to ensure municipalities are removing the regulatory burden. That is another big part of the issue. And I want to circle back to that now, just separating through in your analysis of the drivers affecting this, stagnant productivity in terms of total completions and completions per hour worked and per worker. How much is associated with the intrinsic features of increasing complexity and preference for that in design versus the external ones, such as permitting and zoning and regulatory burden?
Well, that's where I think we are not very solid in our findings, and a lot of it has to do with the way Statistics Canada collects data.
Yeah.
So now we are entering into the realm: can we can we compartmentalize the determinants of lack of productivity or slow productivity? And if we can, how much value or weight can be assigned to one factor or the other? It's very hard to do. The data are not of that good quality to allow us to make causal claims. But you will see in the paper when it's released that there's a generous spread of charts and graphs that show that some factors are very obvious, that we saw an increase in our spending on regulatory burdens, that is municipal bureaucracy. We see it increasing, then declining in around 2010, but you could see that happening. we could see that the share of apartments increasing significantly over time, which means that the structure of housing that we built now from before is changing and the location is changing. We also see the aging of the workforce, which is a very big concern, that the labor force involved in residential construction has been growing. You could see those charts very
Mhm.
clearly. There's no confusion about it. You could also see that there's not been an upskilling of the construction labor force over time. One of the more renowned urban economists at Harvard University, Ed Gleiser, once mentioned recently in a paper that the the patents in when you take out patents to show that you have innovated. The patents in construction industry has either fallen or stayed stable. There has not been an influx of increased innovation. There is an innovation on the upstream side of it. For example, if someone figured out a way to produce better lumber through some technology, that kind of patents exist. But the actual act of construction management and construction production, we don't see an increase in productivity or innovation as could be reflected in patents. So a whole host of things you see.
Mhm.
If we were to attribute causality, we were able to find significant relationship in the increase in productivity and the capital labor ratio. That's where we believe that if firms deliberately and cautiously look at how they spend money and don't just keep hiring more people to produce more, but use capital carefully and more intelligently in technologies, that's where productivity gains seem to increase.
Okay. So a couple final questions before we turn to the audience. That was very helpful. So, of course, we want to be more productive generally because it means we're using our resources better and frees up time, what have you. But with respect to housing, we're primarily concerned these days with the supply and the price of housing. So, in light of your recent findings and your other work, which covers the gamut in housing policy, what are some of the major policy proposals that you would recommend to improve housing supply and housing affordability?
Stephen, you go ahead.
Well, I think one of the things that at all government levels could be promoted as a lever for better affordability is all the unused government land that is sitting out there. And, the city of Toronto, I work on a project right now. They've got 75 acres. They've been sitting on the site for 20 years. They're not going to sell any of the land. There's scheduled low-rise, 4-apartment, high-rise in one of the phases. And, it's not coming to market that quickly. But the federal government, whether it's Canada Lands or whatever, they've got to be a little creative and more supportive financially. And, why not just put this land out to developers to build on this land for social housing, non-market housing, and, create a program that maybe they charge cost plus 10%, a very low sort of threshold to get, construction companies busy and working. They've got big staff that are doing nothing. I mean, those are the kinds of things that it's not, and I agree with Murtaza, it's all creates the social fabric of the community, are the low wage workers who contribute highly to society have to be better looked after and cared for. And it's interesting municipally from a political point of view. You've got a candidate running in New York City now that is pretty sort of socialized, promoting all these kinds of things to support social housing and non-market housing. So I think the government can do a lot, and as opposed to just talk the talk, they're not walking the walk, and that's the unfortunate situation. We also have we have a huge correction right now. There's over 200 projects in Toronto, high-rise condos, where the projects have been stopped. They basically, just because of market forces, market demand, prices, they basically shuttered down all these projects. How is that going to, end up being resolved? And I hear of projects now because I scour the industry from all sectors, high rise, low rise. There are condominium buildings now where people bought 4 or 5 years ago, where they're now facing basically occupation, right? They've got to basically, and the appraisals aren't coming in close to what the people paid for these units. They can't get financing. There's going to be tens of thousands of people that aren't going to close on these units. What's going to happen to that?
Good ideas. Murtaza.
Well, what I would point out is that the construction industry also has to look at itself and have some retrospection. And one of the things that we found, and through CMHC's excellent work, is that the industry comprises of a very large number of very small firms. And that's a problem. That is a very large, the majority of firms have fewer than 5 employees. What does it mean? It means that the size of the industry or the average firm is so small that they don't have real leverage on upstream costs. They're small enough, they're not the Walmarts of retail, so they can't really negotiate prices from manufacturers and suppliers and supply chain managers and logistic firms, but they're just building 5, 10, 50 homes a year, and they're just 5 employees. So there has to be a systematic, deliberate restructuring of the construction industry so the average firm size grows, because that will allow the builders some leverage in negotiating power and the negotiating power they need to bring down the input costs that could be passed on to the end users and buyers. The second thing is, if you want to go modular and prefab construction, which is the case in Japan. Japan builds about 95 to 100,000 homes a year that are modular or prefab. So does Sweden in a very large number. That kind of innovation will not happen with a builder who just have 10 employees, because they wouldn't have the kind of capital and ability and scale to embrace those challenges. So there has to be a deliberate restructuring of the construction industry so that we have larger players, amalgamations, merging, so that we can bring technology and the benefits of technology to construction sector the way benefits of technology has delivered in the manufacturing sector.
Very good points to ponder there. I'm going to shift to audience questions now. 2 for you at a time here, just so we get to a few. So someone asks, how do we provide the housing that people want when denser communities are the more efficient way for delivering services? And another, many cities implemented vacant land tax, I think. Does this actually help get more houses on the market, or is it just another way for municipalities to gain income? So the first one on density and in preference, and the second one on vacant.
Well, let me comment on density. I think the city of Toronto, that's a good question, has listened to this, and they're allowing basically increased density on single family houses. So you can now, if you have a single family house, you can put 4 units in, and now they've raised it to 6. So you can, Murtaza, your house, I don't know what Mississauga's like, but you could put a 6-plex in your house, which is a single family house. And this is, I think, a good way of accommodating the demand for more housing in very dense urban centers.
Yeah, and changing the floor to area ratios as well. Like, some of these things are fixed, and then they prevent, larger homes and lot sizes. So
absolutely. In the socialist economies, they have rigid floor area ratios, so you could have the entire city just to a floor area ratio of 2 or 2.5, and those are the ones that are most unaffordable in those terms. But very quickly, it has to be a balance. I think there has to be a gentle increase in density in existing neighborhoods. People who bought into suburban or suburban-like neighborhoods would not like to see a high rise right next to their homes, but going from a single family to duplex, triplex, quad, is not the end of the world. And if you look at Montreal, and we love Montreal for its facades and beautiful streets, Montreal is all but just duplexes and triplexes, right? So if it works for Montreal, it can work for us as well. So that's a gentle density argument. And yes, there is capacity in the sewer system and the water supply system. So you can definitely take advantage of it. The vacant home tax question is interesting. I don't think there has been a significant increase in the supply of housing, and it's only one time. Once a vacant home is turned into a non-vacant home, it's not going to be vacant again next year. Whatever, as if you get rid of the vacant homes in 1 year, then that's the advantage you got. It's not a gift that keeps on giving in subsequent years. And even then, first in Vancouver and then in Toronto, we realized that there were not many vacant homes to begin with, and we created a mess for ourselves, especially in Toronto, when all those notices were sent, and then it turned out that we created more work for us than we wanted. I don't think vacant homes tax does a significant increase in the supply of new housing, nor do I believe that it creates a big money supply for the municipalities. Municipalities end up probably spending a lot on collecting those vacant home tax. It's not a moneymaker for them. It's something that the city has to do. The councillors and the mayors have to be seen as doing something. So that's something that they gotta say is, oh, I've been very active on the housing file. Look, I put the vacant home tax, but it doesn't move the needle on the affordability.
What sort of changes would you propose to deal with development charges, maybe spreading out financing, modifying that, or permitting and zoning that perhaps, as you've suggested in your recent responses, balances competing needs and interests?
Well, think about development charges. You apply them right there at the time of permitting, right? So you're paying even before the unit exists. And then you want the first home buyer to pay for the development charges for facilities that we'll build over 5, 10, 15, 20 years later. I think the way we amortize the price of a house, we can also amortize the development charges, and just don't associate it with one house or one buyer, because the benefit of that infrastructure that we require, may that be a park, school, or road, or water supply system, the benefit accrues to the larger populations. So spread the cost over a larger population over a longer period of time. And by doing so, you will bring the cost of new homes down, and that would be a good thing.
Stephen?
Well, those development charges and levies are exorbitant, and I think, could represent even up to 35% of the costs of the end product. So somehow these have to be reviewed and looked at, and they're very prohibitive to affordability for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Looking ahead, I note from the recent CMHC or StatsCan data that housing starts are in fact up. Where do you see the issue going? Are we headed in the right direction? Should we expect a greater supply of affordable housing in time, or does much more need to be done? Just looking at the policy, forget the global economic situation, which is outside of the scope of of this housing policy discussion.
Yes, I mean, well, first of all, there's no one housing policy. There's no one housing market.
Yep.
Supply, if it's increasing, it's going to increase in the prairies. You'll see supply increasing in Alberta. You'll see supply increasing in Saskatchewan and other places. But as Stephen was mentioning earlier, supply will not increase in Toronto. Actually, it's going to be a very tough next year, when people will realize that all those new supply for owner-occupied condominiums or low-rise, that has dried up significantly. So I don't really look at month-to-month changes in builds. Housing starts, there could be a variety of reasons why they go up. I take a long-term view, 5 year, 10 years. So I think that what we are heading to the next few years will be a tough time from a supply perspective in Toronto and Ontario, because you could see condo sales have dried up significantly, and the builders who are were in the process of building or ever had proposed projects, they're either stopped construction or trying to turn them into apartments or purpose-built rentals. Things would be tougher on the Ontario side. Things would be a little better in prairies. You already see that. Interestingly, which I learned from the chief economist at the ATB, Alberta Treasury Board, is that for the forecasted growth, you could see that Ontario is behind. Like the increase in population will be higher, and the housing being built is less. And surprisingly, Alberta, and especially the big cities, Calgary and Edmonton, their construction is already in step with the expected increase in population. So it will be a very varied position or scenario where Vancouver, Victoria will be sort of not as will be supply constrained in the future. Ontario, because of the challenges now that we face in the condo market, supply will be constrained. There'll be a different picture in prairies. It will be a different picture in the Maritimes, especially that big unknown variable of White House. It may change the way we trade. It may bring the port of Halifax into a bigger play. It may bring the Prince Rupert port in a bigger play. So you could see housing development and shifting of labor forces and relative to how we trade and how the international trade dynamics change for Canada. It will be an interesting time. I think I'm in the business of making forecasts, but I realize that my business has become really difficult, primarily because of the exogenous shocks that are just unending. Every day there's a new announcement, and every day your models are irrelevant because something had happened overnight.
Very good. Stephen, final words?
Oh, well, I hope our conversation today will motivate the Bank of Canada to drop the interest rate tomorrow, at least a 0.5 point, based on all the economic and political externalities and uncertainties that were existing. I mean, this market right now, to me, reminds me of 89, 90. It didn't recover till 96 or 97. I think we're in this sort of slow. It's going to take a lot to change, and the government should do a lot. And if we're isolated from our southern neighbors, let's just reduce our interest rate and help Canadians deal with the challenges of business and the economy, especially in the housing sector.
Very good, wise words to conclude on. Let's hope the Bank of Canada is listening, tuning into this. And I'm sure CD Howe will be out making their prediction as they always do. This has been a very wide-ranging conversation. We've just gone beneath the surface a little bit into a very detailed paper exploring the challenges of measuring productivity and the trends that very clearly emerge as well. I encourage you to stay tuned and check out the Macdonald-Laurier Institute for the release of that paper, and to look for Murtaza and Stephen's work in the Financial Post, where they come out with their Hyder Moranis column. So thank you both for joining us, and everyone for listening.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks a lot.